What is ideology? The term ideology is used in many ways. The problem is that it can ultimately mean nothing. For the most part, ideology is seen in the negative, that is, as the radical view of some who want to impose their ideas on everyone else. Ideology as illusions. On one hand, ideology can mean a veil, that is, seeing the world through the lens of illusions. The veil is the illusion, the worldview we use to interpret reality. It prevents us from seeing the world as it is. When people tell us we're brainwashed, they typically mean we're blinded by ideology in this sense. Ideology as ideas and beliefs. Another interpretation is that ideology is simply the set of ideas and beliefs a person holds. In this sense, we all have an ideology, we all make claims about the world and structure our thoughts according to a set of ideas. Many dictionaries use this definition. But as Daniel Bell pointed out, if all beliefs, from vegetarianism to monasticism, entail consequences for conduct, then this definition becomes so broad that virtually any way of speaking or thinking counts as ideology. It's relatively easy to find comments on social media where people attack influencers and intellectuals for speaking against ideology, only to accuse them of having an ideology themselves. In other words, with this definition, it's impossible to speak from outside ideology. Ideology as radical ideals. A third interpretation sees ideology as a totalizing vision of how the world should be. In the negative sense, this is viewed as radicalism. For example, we might be labeled radical socialists because we hold a coherent idea of how society should be structured. The main objection to ideology in this sense is that people commit atrocities in the name of their ideals. Communism is often cited as an example of a totalitarian worldview used to justify horrific acts. For instance, in relation to Marxism, Camus wrote, "They will exemplify the way our period marks the end of ideologies, that is, of absolute utopias which destroy themselves in history by the price they ultimately exact." Here, ideology means absolutism, radicalism, and the belief that a single idea should shape the future. Do we live in an ideological world? Already in the 1950s and 1960s, titles like The God That Failed, The Captive Mind, and The End of Ideology appeared. These did not claim that radicals would disappear forever. Rather, their authors argued that it was time to abandon the idea that a single, radical, and coherent system was needed to improve the world. As an alternative, thinkers like Bell advocated for pragmatism, technocratic problem-solving, and incremental reform. Arguably, this is what we have today, liberal democracy. Given this confusion around the term, a common claim among modern intellectuals and influencers is that ideology is bad, that it's brainwashing, and that we must instead see the world as it really is. But this very claim makes the speaker a prime suspect of ideological blindness. There's also the problem of oversimplification. It's unclear how merely seeing reality as it is sufficient for meaningful change. The cynical intellectual as a figure against ideology. Here appears the figure of the cynical intellectual, one who champions cynicism, individualism, and dismisses everyone else as brainwashed. An example in Spain is Jesus Maestro, who claims that only the rich live outside ideology. According to him, only the poor have ideologies, the rich have money. The claim of practicality and politics against ideology. Less radical thinkers, like Daniel Bell, do not argue that ideologies should be completely eliminated. He suggests that grand, universal systems of thought may no longer be relevant in the modern world, but that instrumental ideologies, focused on pragmatic solutions to concrete problems like economic development, are still necessary. Bell's main concern is with radical ideologies that can become dangerous and lead to totalitarian outcomes. The cynical intellectual as the modern ideologue. This brings us to Slavoj Žižek's view of modern ideology. Žižek would see intellectuals like Maestro not as anti-ideological truth-tellers, but as cynical ideologues. Maestro promotes individualism, cynicism, and indifference to societal problems. While working as a state-employed professor, he criticizes the state, consumerism, capitalism, democracy, effort, and society itself as useless and ignorant. Yet his stance doesn't challenge the system, it radicalizes the status quo by reinforcing selfishness, individualism, and resignation. As Žižek famously puts it, they know very well what they're doing, but they're doing it anyway. The rational practical ideas as modern ideology. Žižek would also disagree with Bell's optimism about the end of ideology. He argues that even after the collapse of grand ideologies, ideology is still very much alive, in more insidious forms. Today, ideology is no longer about grand visions of societal transformation. Instead, it functions by managing and maintaining the system. Modern ideologies don't seek revolution, they use cynicism, irony, and detachment to allow individuals to remain complicit without feeling guilty. Maestro himself is a perfect example. You can likely find similar intellectuals and influencers in your own country, those who condemn society with sarcasm and irony while enjoying a privileged position within it. Furthermore, Žižek challenges Bell's claim that modern ideologies are merely instrumental and focused on practical issues like economic growth. For Žižek, even pragmatic ideologies are deeply ideological because they reinforce capitalism by preventing deeper, systemic change. These ideologies may appear neutral or realistic, but they uphold the power structures that sustain inequality and exploitation. The ideological claims of modern anti-ideologues. As a summary, we could argue that in what some think is a society without ideologies, a post-ideological society, ideology is still present, but it no longer needs beliefs. It only needs participation, lubricated by irony, spirituality, or humor. Regarding the comfortable acceptance of liberal democracy as a system that fixes problems as they arise, we find two starkly different positions. Bell sees the end of grand ideology as liberation from fanaticism. The claim is that we can now pursue rational, humane politics. Žižek, however, sees this very view as ideology's ultimate triumph. The system no longer needs your faith, only your cynical participation. The same contrast applies to figures like Maestro. Maestro sees cynical lucidity as intellectual integrity. He rejects ideology and offers no solutions, positioning himself as a rational voice in an emotional, deluded world. He frames his withdrawal as honesty, not surrender. Žižek, by contrast, sees this lucidity not as honesty but as the ultimate form of ideological complicity. Our current socio-economic system thrives precisely on self-interest and individual profit. It doesn't need believers, only participants who know the truth yet continue to function within it, thereby making the unbearable bearable and the unjust sustainable. We can watch people die in war on TV and respond with ironic commentary, or even look for opportunities to profit.